We're speaking with the one and only bassist extraordinaire, Leland Sklar. Of course, the new album is The Immediate Family, and we've spoken a little bit about The Immediate Family in our last interview, but we didn't really delve into the documentary. So there is this documentary that is scheduled to come out in 2022.
Hmm.
Talk to me about that. Is it just sort of like, one of these slice of life things where here we are, here's the band in the studio, or is it a documentary that says this is Leland Sklar, he started in 1975 doing this, and this is so and so a member, and he started doing this? What kind of documentary is it? Is it just really the immediate family in the immediate time, or is it sort of a, well, this is who these guys are?
The latter.
Okay.
Uh, there's a great documentary that was made. By the way, Mitch, it's great to be here with you.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, a pleasure. And I got to see
yeah,
that you were on the Kelly Clarkson show the other day, and I was like, oh, look at that.
it's gonna air on the 15th, I believe. Um, and that was really a hoot because when Kelly won American Idol,
Yeah.
I went in the studio with her and did a couple of songs
Wow.
when she was just beginning all this
Wow.
stuff. And then she told me that she was in Australia working when we were there with James Taylor and Carole King doing our Troubadour reunion tour. And she goes, "That was the best show I've ever been to. It was just so." I mean,
Wow.
she's a hoot, and she's a real fantastic little potty mouth truck driver. So it's no holds
and
barred with
and by
her.
the way, it's great to see her and some of the other ones have the success, because when American Idol started, we all went, "Oh, it's just garbagey. It's just they're just gonna pick whoever. It's not real. It's not." But between her and Carrie Underwood,
Yeah.
yeah, they sort of cut to the front of the line, but they're still very talented, great
Yeah, no,
people.
she's very very good, man. When she opens her mouth in almost any genre, I mean, they sent me a couple of tunes to said pick one to do with her when she's going to sing a song with you on the show, and one of the I picked "Let's Dance" David Bowie, and she killed it.
Did you
So
play on Let's Dance, by the way?
not on the original, but
Okay.
I've done it before. We did a show. There was a show in Las Vegas called Inside the Rock Vault, I think. And it was this big live show, but it was all this music had been recorded and they were on stage. And I recorded that stuff with Simon Phillips from Toto and
Yeah.
Tim Pierce. And we went in the studio with John. Oh, God, what's John's last name? He's from Asia, the group Asia. He's the bass player and sings with them now.
Ferguson?
No, John, it doesn't matter. But we ended up doing like 35 songs for this show, doing real sound alike stuff from the
Oh,
Stones.
so that's the Raiding the Rock Vault, that Vegas
Raiding
show,
the
right?
Rock Wall.
That
Yeah,
has like Hugh McDonald and Robin McCauley.
yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
we did the music for that.
Oh, very cool.
And so Let's Dance was one of them. So it was fun to play it again. So, okay. So back to the documentary.
Yeah, we
Oh, no,
tangent a lot, but that's okay.
the doorbell just rang. I'm going to go let her in and then I'll be back and undisturbed. So
Okay.
hold on.
See,
But we haven't gotten to your question yet.
there we go.
Okay. Seems
So
like
you ran off, and then we were talking about the documentary.
documentary.
So
Okay.
yeah.
So if anybody isn't familiar with it, one of the great music documentaries is called The Wrecking Crew.
Yes.
And it was done by Denny Tedesco, whose father was Tommy Tedesco, who was one of the greatest of all the old studio guitarists.
Yep.
He was part of this amazing group of people that did almost all the recording in Los Angeles throughout the late 50s through the 60s and into the beginning of the 70s. Hal Blaine on drums and Larry Knechtel and Mike Melvoin and Carol Kay and all these people. So Denny did this documentary about them, which is a remarkable piece. Well, he had producers and they approached the immediate family and said they would like to do a documentary about the group.
Wow.
Um, the thing we didn't want to do is like have like Wrecking Crew 2, that kind of a thing. And he said, no, you guys are incredibly different, especially the core four of us, because Steve Postel is like 10 years younger, and he wasn't a part of this beginning thing. He's a part of the band, and and he's like the new guy. I've only known him like 15 years. But he said, the Wrecking Crew, the essence of them was they were like a force to be reckoned with for about 10 years. They did all these albums, from the Beach Boys to the Mamas and Papas to Frank Sinatra, you name it, but they never got any recognition because there was no musician credits on album jackets. And they never left the studio. They would go in the studio around the clock doing people's records, and that was it for them. He said the difference is you guys entered at a time of the singer-songwriter movement in Los Angeles with James Taylor and Jackson Browne and all Carole King and all these people. And not only did you play on their records and contribute like arrangements and stuff, you produced some of them, you wrote some of the songs, and you toured with the artists. And he said, and you've been doing it not 10 years, but 50 years and still going at it. So he said it's a very different outlook. So the documentary film really harkens back to the very beginning, like around 1970 for all of us, and it follows straight through to today. So I'm not sure. I'm curious to see what it's going to look like. They're editing the movie now, and they're anticipating having it finished by the end of this year. Then they go on and they try to, look for buyers and all that.
Right.
And, yeah. So we're anticipating. The thing we're excited about is if it's finished and there's like film festivals, going to the film festivals, having them premiere the film, and then having us play.
Oh, that'd be great.
Which would be really another way to, to sell this project. So
do
we're
you
excited. No clue what it's going to, how they're spinning it or what it's going to be all about.
But do you know how they assembled it? I mean, did they go out to some of your live shows and film you at okay, they did that.
Yeah, they filmed some live shows, tons and tons of interviews from. They've interviewed Linda Ronstadt and Carole King and James Taylor and Jackson Browne and people like Billy Bob Thornton and Phil Collins and Lyle Lovett. So there's tons of interviews, and then they have all these forensic people that are digging up all kinds of photos and footage, but how it's going to be assembled, we have no idea. We've seen no rough cuts or anything like that. They don't want us to see any of it until they think it's in shape, because they don't want us to suddenly be looking at going, well, look, you should be doing it.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, right now they need to get their thing as close as they can, and then we'll come in and tweak it.
They need to get their vision straight. I can respect that, because too many cooks in the kitchen. You know how that works.
Exactly. No, it could be horrible to have.
It'd be like, they're featuring Leland too much. No, they're featuring you too much. No, it's just like
yeah. So we'll see. It was just incredibly flattering when we were approached to do this. It's kind of the last thing I ever thought we'd do a documentary about. Are you kidding? We're just working stiffs, but that's the way this business works.
Well, okay, let me ask you about that, because I'm looking at your discography, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But when you got started, you obviously didn't say, I want to be the guy who they call and play on 2,000 records. You probably wanted to be Paul McCartney, or you probably wanted to be whoever. You wanted to be the guy. When did you start out? What was the band you were trying to get going? And when did you sort of realize, okay, I'm not meant to be Paul McCartney. I'm meant to be the guy behind Paul McCartney. That's fine. How did that happen? And was there a point where there was some disappointment where you went, damn it, I want to be, the rock star, but now I'm the rock star's best friend?
Yeah, it's Nella. Well, I was always in bands throughout the 60s. Now, at the end of the late 60s, I ended up in a band called Wolfgang, which I had incredibly high hopes for, even though I was still in college at that point, and really didn't think I didn't know I was going to have a career in music. I loved music, I loved playing, but I was heading in a different direction. Now, in that band, we had a drummer named Bugs Pemberton, who had a friend named John Fishbeck, who owned a studio in town here called Crystal Recorders, he did all of Stevie Wonder's early record songs in the Key of Life and all that. Well, we had a house that the band rented that was our rehearsal place, and a couple of the guys lived there. And John used to come up and hang out with us at our rehearsals. Well, one day he brought a friend of his who had just gotten back from England with him to a rehearsal, and it was James Taylor, who had just returned from doing his Apple album.
Right.
And
Nice.
he had recorded his first American album, I think at that point. Um, and he played us some of his songs, and we went, "Geez, this guy's talented, really good." And that was it. He hung out, and that was kind of the end of it. Well, James got offered a gig at the Troubadour here in Los
Yeah.
Angeles, and Danny Korchmar was going to be playing guitar with him, who I had never met. Russ Kunkel was going to be playing drums, who I had never met, and Carole King was the piano player, who I had never met.
Jeez.
But they said,
Wow.
"No, we got to get a bass player for this." And James said, "There was this guy at this rehearsal. I think he's the guy." And Peter Asher, who was producing and managing James, they tracked me down and called me and asked me if I would play the Troubadour with him. And I said,
Wow.
"Sure." I assumed I was playing one gig and that was it. And basically, that one gig rolled over into the rest of my life.
Wow.
So it was really weird. I never had aspirations of being, a rock star, or I wanted to be in a band that was successful, and still one of the best bands I was ever in was Wolfgang.
Right.
I've got the only studio experience I had ever had was cutting some demos with that band, and then all of a sudden when James hit, we became like the darlings of the studio scene,
Yep.
and found ourselves in the studio around the clock trying to learn how to work in a studio. I mean, we came in um, beyond moderately ill prepared for what would lay ahead, because I was a bar band guy,
Wow.
playing
I mean, so
clubs.
you're definitely the definition of serendipity. I mean,
Yeah,
you just sort of backed into this, and here
yeah,
we are, what, 50 years later,
yeah,
and you're still doing it.
yeah. No, it's so strange. And once we did the one gig with James,
Right.
and it was moderately successful, from the standpoint people still didn't know who James was, and then all of a sudden he was on the cover of Time magazine, and as the kind of heir apparent to a whole new wave in music with the singer songwriter movement. And the next time we played the Troubadour, there was a bomb threat. The place was way overpacked, and all this. And then they got offered a month tour back east, and asked me if I wanted to do that. And I just left school and never went back. Hit the road with them, but it was it was just a really weird thing. Like you said, sort of backed into it.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things that came into play that were important. Number one, Peter Asher insisted when we did the albums that our names appear on the album jacket, which
Nice.
was kind of unprecedented at that point. So when producers and other artists were looking for musicians to do their singer songwriter albums,
Oh,
became like the benchmark for everybody, and they would look at his album and go, "Well, hell, if those guys are good enough for James Taylor, let's get them." And we found ourselves really in demand. But then when James, we'd do the album, and then he'd, "Let's hit the road," and then we would leave town and go on tour. And so that was the real delineation, was from the Wrecking Crew, was the fact that we were also the touring bands,
right.
and went to a whole other involvement level with the artists. And we were there from the inception of a lot of the songs, where Wrecking Crew would come in, sit down with the charts and play them, and then they would take those charts and make them unbelievable because they were such great musicians. But it was a very different thing, and Denny recognized that and really felt this needed to be documented in the same way like Standing in the Shadows and the Muscle
Hmm.
Shoals documentaries. Now,
Let me just quickly ask you this though, because
yeah,
there's a good and a bad to this, right?
yeah,
The bad is you don't have all the acclaim, and you're not the guy on the Time magazine, or and you don't have all the groupies. But the good side is you can show up at a gig, you can walk through the audience, nobody's going to bother you. You can go eat at the McDonald's across the street, nobody's going to go bother you. Um, Talk to me a little bit about that because you have the fame without the fame in a sense, right? You have
Yeah.
the jets and the hotels and the concert, but you can go to the mall in the afternoon and nobody bothers you. That's
Yeah, I
so
mean, I more than any of the other guys do suffer from recognition just because I committed to an image a long time ago
right,
that I get but it's a different thing because I've always been looked at as a sideman.
right.
So like if people meet me, they just walk up and they go, "Oh man, didn't you play with Phil Collins? Oh, I saw that show. You guys." Where if they met Phil Collins, they would be freaking out and going
Well, yeah,
crazy.
passing out and
Yeah. So I've had the best of that, and there were so many times where one of the funniest things was I remember when we were out on the road with James Taylor many years ago, and a couple of us we went to a mall across the street from the hotel, and they had a nice deli. We had lunch and went and saw a movie. And we got back to the hotel, you know, bumped. We saw James and said, "So what'd you do today?" And he goes, "Well, no, I stayed in my room. You know, I just
well, yeah.
and we looked at him and went, all I have to do is put a hat on, you know, or something. I mean, other than your height, you could get away with going. And then one time he kind of confided in me. He goes, you know, I usually only get recognized if I'm with you. So
Well,
it
you
was
know, the
the
beard
only,
probably is a giveaway.
yeah. I mean, I'll tell you the only thing for me that I don't regret it, but that there's sometimes almost like a gut feeling of a certain amount of jealousy where I think like I look at somebody like Flea, and Flea has only had to do Chili Peppers. I mean, he
Right.
does a lot of other things, but that's his call. But he's made a fucking fortune being in the Chili Peppers,
And being
and
Flea.
the only set he's really been required to know is the Chili Peppers set, where every time I go to work, I'm joining a new band. I'm having to figure out new material, new bass parts, hearing things. I mean, the stress level of doing that is
Well,
pretty
okay.
high. There's a part of me that would have loved to have been like in the Eagles or something like that, where you really are committed to that one thing, and it's been successful. And not so much, I could care less if it was huge money, good money, anything that paid the bills and put a little in your pocket at the end of the day. The hard part of my job, literally, though, is when I'm looking at thousands of albums and tens of thousands of songs that I've had to play on. um, it's a hard job. I mean, you're
Yeah.
really have to be on your game every single day,
So,
and there's no going in the studio and coming out with nothing. You
well,
have to create.
well, you have to. Well, let me ask you about that. Since you're not playing the same 15 songs for 50 years, how do you approach that? I mean, do you sit down for like months and learn the new Phil Collins and the new whatever Bernadette Peters or Leo Sayer or
Yeah.
whoever you've been, or do you sort of say, listen, this is how Leland plays. I'm going to take these songs and I'm going to Lelify them, and will be, you know, good enough, and Phil will be happy, and that's like how do you do? Do you really sit there and go, okay, I got to really be
I've got to nail it.
right?
Like when I the first tour that I did with Toto,
Yeah,
it was because Mike Porcaro was ill and he could not go on, and they were hoping it was something something like that, but it ended up being ALS, which eventually took his life. But I was approached to do their tour 5 days before the tour began, and so I immersed myself in their music for 5 days. I don't when I'm doing something like that, I don't want charts. So it's really a matter of doing playing the stuff over and over and over until you've got it. So what I'll do though is I will learn the as close to what the original was, even if I played on the original. I'll try to get as close to it as I can, but I really focused on Mike's parts on because they gave what they did was they gave me a board mix of the show that they were doing, and I had it on CD and I was driving around in my truck, and every time I got in my truck, that was what I was playing. The first thing I did for my process was the first thing I did was figure out which key each thing was in, so that I could then visualize kind of positions and stuff based on the key. So like the first day, I just really listened to all these things over and over then I just started playing them kind of ad nauseum, until I felt comfortable with it. And as the tour went on, then I started to kind of morph it into more my approach to it, even though it wasn't dramatically different or anything. It's not like it's some bass player who has a style that's complete opposite of mine. Most of the stuff when I've gone in to do it is in my scope of how I play. So I try to bring me to it. And I remember when we did the Falling in Between live album with Toto, uh, we recorded that live show the second week of the tour, and I was still thinking songs and stuff. And about 2 months into the tour, Simon Phillips and I sat there after a show, and he said, "We should have been filming now," because it grew into something. But that
Right.
doesn't mean it wasn't really good then. But I really I tend to immerse myself in it and honor what the original intent was on the thing as best I can, and I try to throw me in. But even on stuff that I've recorded the original on and I'm doing on tour, I'll never play it twice the same way.
Because it
I get,
evolves in your brain.
yeah, I just want to have it be interesting and fun. So I'll do different things on every performance with it, but keep the essence of it intact.
Let me ask you this: when you get a gig like that and you're immersing yourself, do you ever get a part and you just go, "Oh, this is so awful," or this could be so much better? And do you go to them and say, "Hey, I could do this to make it better," or you just say, "Listen, I'm paid to play this. I'll play this, whatever." Like,
A
does
little of
that?
both. A
Yeah.
little of both. I mean, if there's something I think that could be better, I would approach him, because like with the Toto situation, I, I, I was butting right up to where they had just stopped, and for the guy, and I knew the guys in the band before they were Toto. I mean, we had a great relationship and everything.
Steve's a monster, by the
Oh
way.
yeah, I was. Well,
Oh God,
they asked me to do this while I was doing Steve's Ever Changing Times album with him. So,
what a
but
player.
it's one of those things that um, I didn't want it to feel jarring in any way. I wanted it to be as smooth a transition as I could. Now, if I heard something that I thought was like, no, I'm not sure about this. Could we try this? I would propose it, and if they said no, let's keep it the way it is, then I would say fine. You know, I mean that's what we do in the studio too.
Yeah,
If somebody,
and to be fair, you're not there to be a pain in the ass. So,
well, you're not there. You're there to do honor to the music,
correct.
and to the band you're playing with or the artist that you're playing with. But you also, through experience and years of doing this, there's certain things that you might hear that they might not have thought about, or maybe the bass player in that project was less experienced, which can at times be better because their naivety came up with some pretty cool stuff. But it's different every time too. I mean, every single thing that you step into is like a new day in your life. You're not working at General Motors assembling a chassis, and you're in that one part of the chassis where every one that rolls by, you're doing the exact same torque on this
Yeah,
nut and
you're not
outlet.
just shoving in a rivet here. So
Yeah.
let me ask you. I'm just going to randomly look at your discography. I mean, we've got Art Garfunkel, Garou, Vince
Okay.
Gill, Amy Grant. When you go in and you're doing these different projects, which is singer songwriter, French, rock, country, do you just play Leland Sklar bass, or do you say, okay, I got to get the country hat on, I got to get the French hat on, I got to get the A Team movie theme hat? Like, do you approach it differently, or do you just play what you play, and it just fits in?
Uh, I just play what I play, and it fits in with slight modifications if needed for the genre. But basically, I'm very fortunate, and I never stopped thinking about how lucky I am that whatever my style was and whatever my bass upbringing was seems to have an ability to fit into almost every genre. So I don't really have to change that dramatically when I go in and put on a completely different hat. But I'm also cognizant of the different genres and different things,
Right.
tonally, stylistically, where I can I can meld really easily into that style,
Yeah, because I mean,
and
it's
make it
fair to
credible.
say that there is country guitar and rock
Oh yeah,
guitar, and there's a country voice, and there's a rock voice, and there's a metal voice. But
yeah.
do we have a bass, a country bass, and a rock bass? I mean,
Um, I think if you were going to look at those genres and you were picking like specific people within those genres
right.
that's their specialty, you might say, yeah,
Okay.
that's country bass or something. But I seem to have found something that was more universal in approach and tonality and all that. And most
Okay.
engineers that I work with are so thrilled when I come in because I give them a really rich, pure bass. There's not a lot of fret noise. There's not a lot of clanking going on. If I get called for something where they really want to have a guy that plays with a pick, then I'll tell them, look, I don't play with a pick. I've never played with a pick. I'm not good at it. And if you want at this point, I can suggest somebody to
Right.
do this project for you. But generally, they'll say, well, yeah, we wanted pick, but let's see how it turns out. And then they're usually happy with
Gotcha.
what goes on. I'll add some. I'll play back more at the bridge and give it a little more top end, so it gets a little more of that snap going. Uh, but
It's funny. I've heard other bass
eventually,
players say that about, oh, they wanted me to play with a pick, and I didn't. I mean, I can't imagine that being a huge issue, but is it? I mean, is it
oh, it could.
really?
Well, it could be depending stylistically. I mean,
Yeah.
um, I had an opportunity years ago to work with Quincy Jones, and Quincy demanded he wanted pick, and I turned the gig down with him
Wow.
because I said, look, I don't want to come in and embarrass myself by not being able to do what you want or putting you in an awkward position of not really getting the thing you wanted out of this. And there's people that like the Carol Kays and these people who are
Carol K's
amazing
great.
pick players, so I would rather defer the gig to somebody who's more attuned to there. If it was like a heavy, like slapping, popping, and all that, that's stylistically not what I
What
do.
would you?
Some of these things I can bullshit my way through, but that's not how I like to work. So
Huh.
there's enough great players around, and nowadays there isn't that is the work like it was, but especially during the heyday of this, there was so much work going on that if you turn something down, odds are you were going to have something else come
Come up.
in. So
Just real quick, because Jeremy couldn't join us, I had to switch us over to my free Zoom, and at 40 minutes it shuts us down, so we've got like 5 left. But just real quick, on the Magnum PI and the Hill Street Blues and the
mm-hmm.
A Team, since you're going in there and it's partly, I guess, your creation, is that a different thing than recording on a Toto record or recording on a whatever Garou or an Art Garf? Do you have more creative control? And as those things repeat on Netflix and on Amazon, do you just sort of see the royalties come in, or was it a work for hire and thank you out?
Work for hire.
Oh,
I
look
mean,
at that.
there's a certain like a musician's fund where you'll get a little check at the end of the year for performance things, but it's certainly nothing you could live on. It's just it's a couple of tanks of gas at this point.
It's not even a
But that stuff is really plotted out.
right.
So the parts are almost completely notated, but like I did most of those shows with Mike Post, who produced a band I was in 1967. So we'd known each other forever. And he would, and in the beginning, he said, look, that's the part, but if you want to throw something, some color to make you some glisses and different things, feel free to do it. But you're looking at time code and all those things. So like with a record, it's a whole different ball game, a lot more freedom on a
Right.
record. TV, movies, jingles, all that, that's far more plotted and
Regimented. Yeah. Let me just ask you then about that. Creatively speaking, is I play my bass, I'm happy, or is the A Team better than the Art Garfunkel, or is the Trisha Yearwood? Like, are you just happy to play bass, or are you happier when it's like, oh, it's Phil Collins this time?
no,
This is better than.
I'm happy to be playing bass and working. I don't care if it's the biggest star in the world or if it's somebody who's doing it as a vanity project because they've always wanted to make a record.
Right.
To me, there's two options when that phone rings. You could say yes or no, and if you say yes, it comes with obligation, and you go in and you do. You're a professional, and you do the best job you possibly can.
Right.
And in your heart of hearts, you might be going, nobody's ever going to hear this. This isn't great. But but you play it as though you're working with James Taylor or Phil Collins or Barbara Streisand. I mean, that's what a professional does.
Right.
Now, what happens to these records after we do them, we have no control over. I mean, I've worked on some things that I thought were just really kind of awful, ended up being #1 records. And I've worked on other things that I thought were just brilliant that never got released, that are still sitting on a shelf somewhere. So you never know. I'm just happy to gig.
And that reminds me of something Bret Michaels of Poison once said to
Mm-hmm.
me. And he said, you don't play to the empty seats. You play to the 4 that showed up.
Yep.
And yeah, that's what you do when you're professional.
Well,
You don't sit there and moan and go, "Oh, look at all the empty." No, it's
no, it's like, also, like, people have asked me over the years, they said, didn't you get sick of playing Fire and Rain? Played it thousands of times. I said, no, because I said somewhere in that audience, there's somebody hearing it for the first time.
true.
And that's
Yeah.
who you're playing to. Yeah. So I never get bored with any of it. I feel fortunate that I ended up in a career that I didn't expect to have, and that it sustained itself for, over a half a century now. And next year's are starting, finally is looking busy again. I mean, the pandemic was like such an aberrant period, which is still going on. And we're very cautious about everything, but we're starting to, feel things out. We got a short tour coming up with the immediate family in
Yeah, in
November.
November.
And, we're excited as hell about this, but it's not the world we were living in before COVID. So now things are starting to come together as more and more people get vaccinated, and it feels safer at the venues and things like that. So we'll see what the future holds with all this.
Well, tomorrow in Montreal, and by the time this airs, tomorrow will already be long gone, but we're finally going to have the first full show at the Bell Center.
Wow.
And I spoke to the promoter, and the Genesis shows that were happening in November, they were about to get canceled, and he said, you know what? They can now happen. And it's just like, oh.
Great.
So
Great. Well, let's hope they do it all really good, and that they don't have to suddenly go, oh Christ, now we got it's another outbreak, we got to shut down.
yeah.
Just that's the thing I'm hoping. And I know in Los Angeles now they've got new mandates here, and you almost can't do anything if you can't show proof of vaccination.
Well, we have the vaccine passport. In fact, we were the first, Quebec was the first North American, whatever province entity to initiate the vaccine passports, and they check. Now, you read the stuff and they say, oh, Pfizer's only good for 7 months, but it's something, which is better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll see how that goes. Well, let me just what was hold on. I had the this one. Oh, by the way, Ricky Martin that you worked on, he's our first show tomorrow.
Oh, great.
So
That's great.
It's Ricky and I guess it's Enrique Iglesias. Enrique.
Enrique.
I can't say.
Enrique.
I can't say it. Just before we go, because Zoom's going to cut us off because we had to be on this free one. Is there one album that you look back on all these ones that you've played and say, yeah, that's the one that, put the CD in the coffin with me, because I want to take this one with me. That's the winner.
It's impossible to say.
Of course.
Of the I enjoy so much is Spectrum, Billy Cobham. That's still one of my favorite albums I played on. So, but there's so many, because once again, you're talking all different genres and stuff. And I have, ones I like in each different genre. So just pile them all in with me, use them as ballast, keep me down.
Yeah. Let me see here. Laura Branigan, the song Gloria. I met Laura once. She was absolutely terrific. She was super nice lady. And the unfortunate thing is, about a week or two after I met her, she passed away.
Yeah, it's just the cruelty of disease. She was so young and talented, and there's been so many, the Minnie Ripertons and all these different artists that passed so young. And you just kind of, with the heartbreak of that is something.
On the album, there's a couple of bass players. Did you actually play on Gloria?
Well, this is the thing Bob Glob and I go through, because in my mind, I can remember cutting that track, but
Right.
Bob says he did it. And at this point, I just go, well, then you can have it. I don't care. And sometimes you work on a project where you've done the track, and then they maybe want to change something, and you're not available, so they've gone back in and recut it with somebody else. Because I cut Sarah's Smile with Hall and
Hall
Oates,
and Oates.
but Scotty Edwards ended up on the track because I think they ended up recutting the song after we cut it. I think they changed like key or something like that. But I know it's me on Rich Girl. So on these albums, sometimes you have a couple of guys, and it gets hard to suss out who's who and what's what on these. But I could care less, who
Right.
gets the credit. It's like if I go into all music and all that stuff, it still says I worked with the Bee Gees. I've never played with the Bee Gees at all, and but it's just like whatever. I always try to straighten people out when they ask me about certain things. I go, no, it wasn't me. It was
It's
so and
okay. Once on Wikipedia, I interviewed Alice Cooper, and
so.
we talked about the new album. And about a week later, after the interview came out, I went to Wikipedia, and it said Mitch Lafon produces new Alice Cooper record. And I went, I'm not going to correct that. I'm just going to leave that there until somebody realizes it's wrong. I mean,
Yes, yes. Why not?
I'll take a production credit on Alice Cooper's record. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
um, I one of the drummers that played on that does stuff like you is Alan Schwartzberg.
Oh yeah, I've worked with Alan.
Alan's great,
Yeah.
and he has told me, he goes, listen, I can listen to the Jimi Hendrix thing, I can listen to this Cheap Trick thing, and I know that that's my part. I know they used me. Can you recognize your parts? I mean, when you like Gloria, can you sit down and say, okay, I don't know, okay, that's me. That's how my finger like. Can
There's
you?
certain nuances in my playing that if I'm listening in detail, I can recognize because I go through this a lot on my YouTube channel. Because I've only posted 99.8% of the time on my channel is all stuff I've played on.
Right.
And sometimes I'm looking at an album and there's 3 or 4 bass players on the album. So I sit and listen to each track until I hear a track and I go, no, that's me. I can tell by a gliss that's the way I play and not the way that guy plays and
Right.
stuff. So yeah, to an extent, it depends. But there are projects where you've really been directed into a part, and it could be anybody at that point because you're really not bringing anything other than the chart to the
Right.
table. So it's different every time.
Are there songs that you've played on where maybe they've gone back in, as you say, with Sarah Smile, and they've recut it, and then you listen to it and you go, okay, the first verse is me, the second verse is Bob, the third verse is Tony, the fourth, like, are there parts where you're just comped?
Um, there could be, but I've never really paid any attention, and I could really give a crap at that point. So I don't really dig into it. I mean, the funny stuff for me is like when somebody, like a band, has done an album, and then I'll get called to come in and replace the bass player on it because their tone wasn't good or their feel wasn't good. So when they're mixing, I'll get a call going, can you come in and learn all these parts? Because we don't want them to know they've been replaced and you're not going to get album credits. This is just, and I go, fine. And I go in and I sit down and I study each song and work it all out and then play it. And nobody knows the better.
That's great. And here, just before the free Zoom shuts us down, let's just get back to the immediate
Yeah.
family.
Yes.
When you go in and make the immediate family, do you really want to say to yourself, this band has a sound, or do you sort of take from everything you've done and say, you know what, let's have a country song, let's have a, like, did you approach it as this is fresh music and that's it, or do you sort of look back and say, man, we should make another sort of Sarah Smiles kind of record? Like, how did you
No,
approach that?
no, we approach it. We have an absolutely our own identity,
Yeah,
and it's basically a rock band
right.
at heart. So what we're doing is absolutely just true to the immediate family and has nothing to do with the stuff that we've played on for other people. So we have our own signature sound, and that's the thing we're enjoying is that the buck stops with us. We're not working with artists. We are the artists finally, and and it's a joy for me to be sitting there with Russ Kunkel, Danny Korchmar,
Yeah.
and Waddy Wachtel, who I've been playing with for over a half a century, and still in a band having fun together, and then adding Steve Postel to the equation was just like frosting on the cake. But we're having a ball with this, and it really is us. It's got, and people are writing in to me going, people say rock is dead. It is not. You guys are, man, you guys are doing it.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting.
You know what? The whole rock is dead thing is silly. Rock has evolved like jazz evolved. You go back to the 1920s and the jazz days, it was everywhere. And then as things moved on, it became, the festival, the Newport Jazz Festival.
Yeah.
That's where we sort of are with rock. Rock has evolved, and now you go to the whatever heavy Montreal, and it's still there, but it's not going to be on the radio. Neither is Casey and the Sunshine Band. Stuff evolves. Like, so
what's
what?
What's radio at this point too? I mean, it's the whole world of music as an industry has changed so dramatically.
Yeah, but I mean, stuff moves on.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, one of my mantras has always been, "Don't be an old fart."
Yeah.
I mean, things move on, and you want to be viable, and you want to work. So you go with how things are. I don't sit around and lament that analog recording is no longer the standard, that it's digital, because it's a different whole thing. But I could sit and bitch about it, and I just sound like an old dude bitching about what once was, or I can go to work.
Yes.
And feel engaged, and that's how I approach it. I just love the fact that I have things going on still in my life, and I still feel viable. And there's touring coming up next year, and all kinds of interesting projects coming up, and I'm just grateful to it at this point. And I'm gonna be on the run as long as I possibly can.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for it too. And I'm just going to say Buddy Holly, but imagine if since Buddy Holly came, if every single album had been Buddy Holly up until 2021, we'd be completely bored.
Yeah.
Doesn't take away from the greatness, we'd be bored. So the fact that we went from Buddy to the Beatles to Black Sabbath to Casey and the Sunshine, that's great. And
I agree.
And now that we're at Post Malone, it's great. You got to keep moving.
Yeah, I agree totally.
70 years of the Beatles, as though it might sound great, but we'd be bored to tears.
But boy, it sure is great going back and listening to the old stuff.
And there's nothing wrong
And
with
that's
that.
the beauty of this is all documented, and you can enjoy
Forever.
Sit there and listen to Mozart, and you can. I mean, it's just like it's all there, and that's the remarkable part of it.
Yeah, and my point being is that I just don't see why you sit and bitch and moan about, oh, it's not there anymore. It's like, yes, it is there, and we've got this new stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, we have the Beatles, but we also have Black Sabbath, and we also have whatever Post Malone, and it's glorious.
Yeah.
There we go. I'll leave you on that because this thing's going to shut down.
Yeah.
Thank you for the part 2. Apologies that Jeremy's tech was gremlin-esque today.
Well, also I'm just throw it out at you. If at some point you want to come back and do a part 3, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I'd love to. I would love to because this onion has so many layers to peel. I mean, holy mackerel!
I'd be more than happy to spend more time with you guys when technically we can not be looking at a clock ticking away at us on here.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because you know what? I'm gonna just have to pay the $200 and get the own. Normally, Jeremy has all that stuff, but I should probably just get it for myself. But anyway, as we say in Montreal, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
And truly, thank you for the music. That Phil Collins stuff for me in the '80s was terrific.
It was magic.
Yeah, No Jacket Required is easily one of the top 10 greatest records ever made.
Yeah, I love that album. I could listen to that every day. It's such a special treat.
I actually listened to it the other day walking the dog, and it was just fun. It was sunny. It was 25 degrees, and I hear this, and it's just, dog's having a coughing fit back there.
I hope your pup's okay. That's the main thing.
Thank you, sir. And we will reconvene at a later date. Merci.
Okay, my pleasure.
Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.
Let me stop that recording.